What is going on, everybody? Look, we got a Christmas tree there. So, hello. Welcome. Just trying to get this camera set up right for the video. There's some sparkles for you guys in the background. Welcome to Revolution Gathering, everyone. Jay Baker here, your host for today's Revolution Gathering. So, yeah, it is. What is today? Today's date is the 28th. We're almost out of here. Almost out of this crap year. I want to see something cool Brian Yarbrough got for me. If you know, my son's name is Milo. And Brian, a few years ago, got this really sick skateboard for me. That's Milo, I don't want to grow up. And I don't want to grow up. And one of my prized possessions. I still got it in the plastic because I'm a nerd. Comes with a record. It's pretty cool. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Yarbrough, for that. Share fun things with you guys. Hope you had a wonderful Christmas. I know Christmas can be tough for a lot of folks. I got a really cool birthday present from my girlfriend, Jeanette. Look. Chuck Spikorama. If you know, you know. This guy knows. And anyhow, welcome to Revolution and the last Revolution gathering of 2025. Man, the past 5 years have been strange, right? Really strange. But we survive. We continue to move forward and do our thing. So I turned 50 December 18th. I thought I was going to see you guys last week, but I got sick. I got a cold. It was the end of all the after school programs were wrapping up, and I guess there was a bit of a cold going around in school, and even though I was just there after, just for I guess some of the after school classes gave me the disease, gave me the sickness. I got the sickness, folks. Yeah, so sorry about that. And I was going to try to record something, but then like the holidays hit and it was just like, do you have all the gifts? Do you have everything together? Do you all do this? December's tough because like my part-time work stops halfway through. And then, we got to spend money and do all that stuff and get really busy. And then my birthday happens and we always do, me and my kids always go out for dinner for my birthday. Which is really sweet because they're the best. There was one year I didn't want to, like a couple years ago, I didn't want to celebrate my birthday. And the kids were like, oh, no, we should get some cake, Dad. We should get some cake. And we were at the mall. And so we went over to the Cheesecake Factory and I let the kids pick the cake out. And then they started, must have been like Milo's 10, Minnie's 8. So Milo was probably, they were probably 3 or 4 years younger, and they bring the cake, and then the kids just automatically start singing happy birthday to me, and I got like all like teared up and really moved, and I was like, all right, well, from now on, this is what I'm doing with my kids. So, except this year we didn't go to Cheesecake Factory. We went to oh gosh, what's it called? Red Robin's, because the kids like the endless fries. I like the endless fries. Here's some some Baker trivia for you. That's Red Robin was the first place I found out we were losing Heritage USA. That my dad was giving it to Jerry Falwell. My mom was telling my godmother Vi Asvito and her husband Eddie what was happening, and I was like, "What? What? What?" Yeah. So Red Robin's got some weird memories for me. But anyhow, endless fries. Where you can't go wrong with endless fries. My dad called me like twice on my birthday, which was wild, and my phone rang, and I was like, "What is my dad doing calling me?" And then I was like, "Happy birthday," and I was like, "Oh, yeah, it's my birthday." And, it was really we had a really great conversation. So, I'd like to say there's something cool happening there with us and, his and Lori, my stepmom as well. I think something just, I think there's some healing happening, so grace is really cool, and that's why I don't like cancel culture or don't like limiting grace, because grace is, it's always nice to have an opportunity for grace. But yeah, it's been a tough year, for everybody, um, and we're all just kinda making it through, rolling with it, trying to make the best of it, and that's what we tried to do with Christmas, and we did. We had a good one. Me and my ex-wife, we had breakfast together for Christmas morning with the kids, and then we all opened the presents together. And then my ex-wife Karen took Milo mountain bike riding, and then me and Minnie went and had Chinese for lunch. It was really fun. It was a good day. So there you go. That was mine. I hope you guys survived it as well. And yeah, we've got a lot to do today, but I just thinking about next year. Tell you what's in the works right now is um, the we are building a brand new website from scratch. So brand new website, and I know everybody's like, "A website? Do people still use those?" Yes, but the great thing about this is it's going to be able to connect us all together. It's going to be able to kind of let people know where we're at and what we believe and what we think. Keep us all connected in all the different platforms that we're on. It'll kind of be like a main hub for that, and also a place where we can plan like book events and study events and different events that just aren't on Sunday, so people can know like, oh, I can go there and find out if we're going to do something or if this is happening or, if Jay's going to be in my town, that type of thing. So that's happening. A lot of really cool stuff is happening with Revolution. It's kind of like a rebuilding of our work, and I'm very excited about that. So today I want to talk to you about a few different things. I think, is there anything else I wanted to tell y'all? Don't forget to like and subscribe, as always. If you're listening online, if you're listening to a podcast, don't give us a 5-star review. That really helps get the word out. So I was thinking about the church, and this was going to be part of last week's talk. I've been reading this book about Lacan. I'll share with you here in a little bit. And I've had I have interactions with a lot of people talking about theology and politics, and often I find that people want to talk to me within like kind of the realm of Christianity or a type of Christian culture or a type of thought idea that I feel like I'm working out of, that I'm not really in that system or in that larger community for just in the fact that I've rejected quite a bit of things like apologetics and things like that, and people want to talk about that and talk about there's some positive apologetics and different things like that, but I often I try to have good conversations, but I often remind myself like this is really something I've stepped out of. And Revolution, what we're doing as a gathering is something different and unique, and with the hope of bringing change to the church and being change for the church. And what that looks like when we kind of get rid of sacred cows, when we reform, when we kind of get rid of some of the stuff that we maybe hold sacred. And I'm not saying it's going to be for everybody, but I think there needs to be something else for a lot of us. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I've been using the big notebook lately for some of my notes, and I find it's really helpful just to get the bigger ideas in there. Bookmarks, but yeah. So Snoopy, punk rock Snoopy. So how to begin today, I guess, is the question. I know how to get through it, but I'm wondering how do we get started today? And I think the best way to do that is I wanted to look at Christianity and its culture, especially its American culture. And I just kind of was writing down some thoughts that I had about it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share some thoughts of kind of what it seems to me, even if we weren't really using the church, the name church, you know. Oh, that's another thing I forgot to tell you guys. I've been going to therapy. Well, it's therapy for finding out if you have ADHD, and it's very, very, very like intense. And by intense, I mean it's like every 2 weeks, and then we moved it up because we thought I might lose my insurance, so we moved it up every week. And it's a lot of monotony, you know, like same kind of questions and things, but you're going through all your different times in life. And I was diagnosed with ADHD a particular time. I'm not as hyper as I don't have the hyperactivity as most some folks, but anyway, so there's that. And I'm glad to know, because it kind of makes me feel a little bit normal knowing that. And I think there's, opportunities and stuff to help me be able to kind of deal with this and live with this a little bit more. So 50 years old and just finding that out. So always an adventure. It took me to like 20 to find out I was dyslexic. And who knows what I'll find out when I'm 60. I'll find out I'm Wolverine. I've evolved. I'll have claws. I mean, that's my hope. So, just pray for that if you could. That would be great. But let's get into this. It's funny because this kind of started as one talk and then it changed into something else. My original thing that I wrote out in here is all hope lost. I was really feeling it that day. And I was thinking about war, and I was thinking about what's happening in Congo and Israel and Palestine, and then in religion and culture, and and who we're always fighting each other. And this kind of concept of, the kind of, the kind of culture of you can't be a Christian if, or you can't be a blank and a Christian type of thing. Anyway, here we go. So this is what I was thinking of church in a very roundabout, strange way of just. Honestly, I was upset because I was very cozy in bed, sleeping. As I tell you, a lot of my talks come when I'm in bed, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. And so I had to get up, turn on the light, find a pen, and just start jaunting this down. So let's act as though we're just pitching something. Set up all these private clubs that follows rules and regulations and kind of is inspired by this very old book. Some of us think of it as a book of rules. And what we're going to do is we're going to pick and choose which parts we value the most. The ones that, particularly by us. Oh, look at that. Pete's giving me a text. And which I'm going to recommend some Peter Rollins in this as well. But like this idea of like setting up a private club, this is what a church feels like. It's like setting up a private club with this old book, one that we often make a book of rules. And we kind of just pick and choose which parts we value the most. We negotiate with what we really like. By us, and maybe other traditions, that will dictate how we set up our private club, our country club, if you will. And then by following these rules, we will know who is really serious about being in the club. Kind of really, what are the theological absolutes that we all feel that we need to have? The big rules our forefathers and gods have set out for us really tell if you are part of this group. So it's the ones our faith culture dictates to us. So the big rules are really going to tell you, do you belong or don't you belong? And that'll be a sign of, you know, are you celibate? Are you not doing certain things? Are you doing certain things? Are you tithing this amount of money? Are you voting a certain way? This tells us if you are part of this club. And these are the signifiers that we look for to see if you're serious. And I don't know if you experience this. I think great thing about youth and teenage years is you get to experience these things in new ways, that and you kind of grow into them. But when you start to first really see them, they're a little bit more obvious. So for me, it was like church attendance, uh, lust, sex, out drinking, all these things of like, if you abstain from these things, you're serious about being in the club. And if you don't, then you're not really part of us. And so whatever our faith culture dictates to us, which can be very different if you are involved in, you know, uh, this was a Baptist church I went to in high school. I went to the school there, dropped out of that school and went to the public school, but I stayed with the youth group a lot and had some really interesting experiences there. But these faith elements of what we're supposed to do and what we're not supposed to do. What I was gonna say, but it's very different if it was like maybe Assemblies of God versus like something that's more Arminian. I mean, Arminian as Assemblies of God, or if it's Baptist, or if it's Calvinist, you're gonna have different things, that traditions and ideas that have uh, been negotiated to say, oh, I'm really a member. I'm really a part of this. This is the club rules. And a lot of times they're just unspoken, you know, but they're, believed that you have to believe this or think this in order to be a part of the club. So it does become kind of this special club, um, where everybody's welcomed, but not if you really want to be a member of the club. So what happens is anyone who questions these and does not protect them, even if they get the two big right, and when I say the two big one rights, if you don't protect these rules or regulations or convictions, if you don't, even if you get the two big ones right, which is loving God with all your heart, equally as important your neighbor as yourself, um, you will be seen in rebellion and probably worthy of suspension or some sort of wrath or correction. Um, so especially if they claim to follow, you know, our Godhead, so this is our God. We follow God. We've got the truth figured out, So if any of you who question these things, question our traditions, question the negotiations that we worked out and what we value as important, um, you're out. You're seen as being rebellion. Now, one of the reasons I want to talk about this is because when you look at historical context and we read when we're reading the Bible, and we're talking about the Bible, and they're dealing with certain things, and there are certain things that are really valuable to them, and they have very different convictions, some that come from religion, some that come from their own culture, and things that we just don't find important at all. For example, the Apostle Paul was like, listen, you know, you should just be celibate, because Apostle Paul thought Jesus was coming back in like a year or two. Just be celibate. It's best to be celibate, but if you have to have sex, get married, so you don't get consumed with that. But get married, but don't enjoy it. Don't enjoy it. It's not. It's just do it so you can get it over with and not think about it. Those are things that Paul thought were important. Those are things that we don't really value anymore. That aren't You're not going to be seen as a part of rebellion. If I mean, I've seen churches where the pastors were like, me and my wife, we're in bed and we make, and they do their sermons from bed and they talk about how awesome their sex is and stuff like that. And these are the same people who will like hate gays and premarital sex. People living together can't get married in their church because they're not part of the club. So we kind of pick and choose what's valuable to us now. Like marriage was about property. If a woman was raped, it was seen as not as a crime against that woman. It was seen as a crime against property. I mean, these are just not things that we think anymore. We look at that and go, they're barbaric, and we negotiate them away. There's a lot of things in the Bible that we negotiated away. And even Paul did, like, what did these disciples say? There's a few things you should hold, don't eat animals that are strangled, don't drink blood, and don't be, I can't remember, it was something about sex, but I can't remember exactly what it was off the top of my head right now. Promiscuous, I think it was. And so Paul's like, fantastic. And Paul then goes away and he's already like, oh, sacrificed animals, not a big deal, blah, 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 not a big, and nowadays, like, we're not like, was this animal strangled, or was the throat, is there blood in this? I need my steak well done because I'm not allowed to consume any blood. Those things just aren't valuable to us, but it was very valuable to the first church leaders, to the first disciples, that we abstain from these things. These are important things to abstain from. And we negotiated away, and then we come up with our own things that we find vitally important to create our country club of Christianity, right? And so I think binding and loosing would be an interesting thing to talk about soon as well. Maybe we'll put that into the next year as well. I know I've got a request to do some talks about hell next year, so we're going to do that. Of course, we'll start out with Galatians, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about binding and loosing and that type of thing. There's just a lot of ethics that we would not, biblical ethics that we would not consider ethical nowadays. You understand? Does that make sense? Feel free to say so in the comments. So loving God and neighbor is not enough unless that's dictated by our customs and rules. The rules for the community, showing you're serious to the cause, and really part of us. What I find that happens with a lot of churches like this, and people are like, legalism is good, it's just rules and regulations for the church are important. I understand that to a certain extent, but it also seems kind of strange, because it's like, I come here once a week, I support the church, I want to hear something, and then you expect me to do all this to really belong. I think it should be a place where we find our convictions and find our callings. Even Paul talks about, like, different people have different callings, people have different things that they're called to do, different convictions, things they're convicted about. It's unique, just like people, but for some reason we often get caught up in this wanting to assign people a certain way of thinking. The divide here, I would say, is, we do stuff like we ignore what Paul got wrong. Paul was wrong about the return of Jesus coming back soon. We ignore those things, or then a lot of our stuff comes from counterfeit gospels that aren't even not gospels, but counterfeit verses and Bible pages, Bible pages, like books of the Bible, like the pastoral epistles that don't belong and things like that. People often struggle with Paul because there's so much bad stuff written in the name of Paul that's not actually Paul. And sometimes that becomes, I mean, calling them the pastoral epistles, half of the, so many folks think, well, this is the stuff you have to do to be pastors. And it's like, no, those books are literally not just forgeries, they're anti Paul's theology. It's someone creating an anti Paulinian theology. Um, And then if we're educated by people claiming to know something we don't like a lot of scholars, a lot of biblical scholars and biblical historians, who I'm always just completely fascinated by. I mean, it's not that I think I'm going to find the ultimate truth there, but I do feel like I'm finding at least a context, a much better context to understand this book that just seems to become, the more I know about it, becomes even more strange. It becomes more loose. It becomes more like we're really we're really far from it. You know what I mean? And that's why I think it's good to have, like, if we really wanted to have true fundamentalism that would be positive, our fundamentalism would be like, okay, we're going to love the neighbor as ourselves. We're going to love God. We're going to love the poor. We're going to do these things. And there's other things that we're just going to have to realize weren't really meant for us, and not, it was meant for that time, or maybe it wasn't even meant for that time. It's a really hard book to take in, but a lot of people would argue with me on them, like, oh no, Jay, it's very clear, blah 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 blah. And I get it, because I used to think that way. I used to think it was really clear, and it was like a rule book and regulations and law, and it was telling me A, B, C, and D. But the more I've studied the history of the book, the more I've studied scholarship behind the book, I've realized, okay, my tradition is changing, and I'm realizing that we have become stuck in a way that is more based on man's tradition and some people's interpretations that I don't necessarily agree with. But and this is what's really thinks is like, let's say someone with an education, someone with a doctorate in scholarship or biblical history or things like that, and they come along, they know something we don't like. It's, they'll say, well, that's because they're trying to destroy the truth. That's because they're enemies of the church, and are, they want to, like Bart Ehrman's a good example, because he's not a Christian. And so people are like, well, he's not a Christian, so obviously he's trying to destroy the church. And he's not. He didn't spend his whole life studying biblical scholarship to be like, one day I'm going to just tear the church apart. I'll say sometimes he seems a little you know, like he's not, reading the room, like, hey, I'm going to do a thing on, the virgin birth and why it's completely ridiculous on Christmas. Like, maybe do that in the middle of the year. Just, he laughs sometimes during he has a podcast that I like to listen to, but sometimes he laughs at really odd things, and it's like, maybe pull back the nervous laughter a little bit. But it's not this like ha ha ha. And Dan McClellan, another guy I like, he he's oh gosh, why am I not thinking about it? Anybody know what Dan is? Mormon. And so, of course, oh, well, he's Mormon and he's trying to do this and he's trying to destroy, Christianity outside of Mormonism. It's just not true. People, oh, he hates the Bible. It's like people get so confused with hearing facts, scholarship facts, and historical facts, and that are just most scholars agree on. And then they get angry when they find out that it doesn't agree with their theology or their tradition. And it's like, well, your tradition just isn't based on the historical meaning behind that. It's something that kind of grew out of that over time, and you guys kind of adopted, but there's no biblical command for you to be practicing what you're practicing. It's not really a biblical thing. It's just part of your tradition. And they go, oh, no, 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 we can't have that. They must be against God. And so it's a pretty weird club to be a part of. when that and that what why I think I like being online is one, I've really never liked walking into church buildings. And that's why Revolution always did really good when we met in bars. Bars were always a good place because it was like common ground and things like that. But these like rules and these regulations and these traditions often just continue to create this idea that this faith is some sort of exclusive, or that somehow, somewhere, someone has a corner on the truth. And we are compelled to follow which sometimes those corners that we find, or where we were raised, or how we were grown up, we feel compelled to do that. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit with the big other. Now, I am no expert on philosophy, and I am definitely not an expert on Lacan, but I've been reading this book, and it's by Todd McGowan, and it's the Cambridge Introduction to Lacan, and it is really fascinating book. And I'm going to read it to you guys, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I find interesting, and how I think some of this idea of the big other, which I still haven't nailed down yet, but that's okay. I was talking about the ground of being before I completely nailed that down either too with Tillich. I like to share these ideas with you, and we all kind of work them out together. But the big other is a great kind of concept, Lacanian idea and concept. And Lacan was extremely influenced by Freud as one person, but Lacan built off that and kind of took it more into a philosophical world. So we're going to look into a couple things, and I meant to put in my yellow Post-its for this, and I didn't, but that's okay. I'm going to trust my Sharpies. I put in my highlighters. I put in some highlighters, and we'll start with the big other. So are you ready? Ready to jump in with me here? So let's talk a little bit about the big other, and let's see what Todd McGowan says about Lacan's concept of the big other. Authority is not confined to the political geist. We are used to thinking of political leaders, presidents, prime ministers, judges, mayors, and police as the only genuine source of authority, right? State rules and cultural elites seem like the ones responsible for determining the course of our lives. But Lacan conceives of a different social authority, an authority that's not confined to a descript powerful people as primary. So I would even say not even to church leaders or politicians, or he's saying I would even throw in church pastors and leaders and things like that. Okay. But Lacan conceives of a different social authority, an authority not confined to discrete, powerful people as a primary. Whereas political leaders tell people how to act, social authority infects subjects on the level of the unconscious desire. Now, listen to that. Social authority infects subjects on the level of unconscious desire. Lacan's name for social authority is the big other. And for me, as a young person, I think I was always reading into social authority. And there's some really good examples here, so let's just jump into it. But I'll give you a few of the things that he says really, really quick. It has the power, the big other, or the social authority, it has the power that it does through the way that subjects invest themselves in it. Lacan contrasts the big other with the little other. The big other is the force of the social authority, while the little others are the people with whom I interact. We don't interact directly with these little others, but do so through the mediation of the big other. And so what I'm getting from this is it's almost like this kind of social pressure that we live in. And some of the stuff that I was talking about when I was reading my book here just a minute ago, what my thoughts just a minute ago is, as a lot of that stuff that we see within the religion and Christianity is this kind of more of a social order, a social authority that kind of is around, that's even bigger than the, like, say, the pastor or the staff or things like that. Like, there's just a social, there's some sort of big other over us that we might not even be dealing with one on one, but as a whole, there's this kind of big other. It's almost like Big Brother in 1984. Um, so we don't interact with it directly with these others, but we do through meditation of the big other. The big other gives us the term that we use and indicates how we should use them. So the big other gives us the terms that we use and indicates how we should use them. And think about that in church, Christian language, how we speak to one another, what we don't say and what we do say, and how that is dictated to us. To jump on, when we speak of little other, we do so through the big other. Its authority rests in the background of every social interaction. And I like this kind of like almost like this haunting, like this specter, like this ghost, this kind of behind us, this just nothingness that is putting this big other, this this just thing, this just group thing, this human thing that is just seems all around us, that is causing us to live a certain way because it's just in the background of every social interaction that we have. um like I said, I'm jumping all over this book because it's a great book and I highly recommend it. And if you get a chance to pick it up, I recommend. I mean, uh, Todd McGowan is just a fantastic philosopher and a really great writer, and really does a lot to help kind of strip things down, help folks like us, lay people, understand what he's saying. So the big other represents a necessary force of an indirection that comes first. This is why LeClan titles his sixth seminar "From Other to the Other," and not "From the Other to the Other." It is the only through the path of the big other that lays down the subject has the possibility to encounter the little other. There is no way that the subject can relate directly to the subjects. For Lacan's, there is no intersubjectivity. Every interaction occurs through the big other, the social authority that emerges of the symbolic order. So all of our actions with each other are all bound by this big other, by this social order. I mean, it's just kind of mind boggling. We will sacrifice ourselves for the sake of conforming. We can never go far enough for the big other. The more we capitulate to it, the more it asks of us. It's kind of like, almost like religion or legalism or things like that. Like the more you do, it's the one word you don't get is enough. Successful conformity is not possible because we are trying to conform to a force that has purely symbolic status. There is no substantial big other to grant us recognition that we seek. So there's no person that can be like, you have reached enlightenment. God's not going to, there's not a God that's going to come down and say, you've done it. You have sat it. Well done, good and faithful little other. That's not going to happen. It's a purely symbolic status with how we act with one another, how we do in church and things like. And that's why a lot of times when we find out like, oh, this pastor had been doing all this stuff all this time, or all these people were lying to us, or all these people weren't really doing it. Well, they were doing it. They just were doing other things as well. I mean, they were living that symbolic status within us one-on-one, and that symbolic status was there so much that it was causing them to deny their real selves so they could be a part of that, what the big other was requiring of them, even if they were still only being able to say it and do it symbolically. I remember growing up, there'd be people who were like Sunday Christians, they come to church on Sunday and then they live crazy during, it's like, we're always looking for a way to exclude others, and to really, that's probably the biggest part with community is always looking for an outsider. And that's how communities come together, is like, oh, we're going to come together and there's the outsider. And we don't really live in this kind of free space. We don't live in where all people are equal and all, we don't live with the strangers and things like that. We wanted these communities, and the communities are often these like gated type communities, unfortunately. And that's hard for us to see because we've been probably over the past 30 years of Christianity, community has been like community, community. We have small groups and we're focused on community. It's all about community. Uh, but the problem is with community like that. I remember one church that was really big on community that I knew back, and I was jealous of this church because it was a big church, and I was meeting in a bar down the street, and even people who worked for me, because we did services during the week, were going to this church, and it was community and small groups and community. And then one of my friends came to me who decided to come out of the closet, and all of a sudden he was an outsider now. All of a sudden, he wasn't living up to the social expectations. He was no longer the big other. No, he's exchanged a different social other. He has another big other somewhere else now. You know what I'm saying? Like he's decided, I don't want to. This is not a social. Uh, this is not the what was the word I was looking for? Hold on a second. This is not the social authority I want to be under anymore. This doesn't feel right. This isn't me. This is not. And all of a sudden, he was no longer a part of the community. So that's a tough thing, is you've got all these rules and regulations of what to do. And you see a lot of churches tighten just over time, really try to tighten their grip of what this is. And then you get church membership. You have to sign this thing. You're going to be underneath their leadership. You're going to listen to them. You've got discipleship and things like that. But it usually just becomes like this thing of like sin management, life management. But then it starts to get involved in your personal life, your marriage, and with your children and how you raise your children and all this stuff. And it's really there. And so all of a sudden, this concept of loving my neighbor as myself and loving my enemy and doing good to others now becomes a million more rules and regulations around that. And those almost become afterthoughts. The very truth, the very essence, if you were to be a true to that, it's gone. You know what I mean? If you were to be true to like a real just really, if you were just into the very essences of Christianity, the very basics of Christianity, but the things that say Christianity is covered by, you'd be good. But this social pressure, this big other within this community says, no, you got to do more. Yeah, so you can never please it. Remember, that's what it was saying. He's like, the big other, you can never please it. And it's not just in church, it's in every order where this big other is, because it's just purely symbolic. It's just a symbolic thing. It's not, it's like, it's not even a ghost because it was never alive. It's just symbolic. Yet we're living in it every day. This becomes evident with our ways of dressing. This is what I like, because I love fashion. I love fashion. I've always loved fashion growing up. I remember one time when I started with all the guys at Red Letter Christians, the first year we met together as Red Letter Christians, there was like 7 of us, or 8 of us, maybe 10. And they put me and Shane Claiborne together. Like, yeah, put the 2 young, because we were the young'uns back then. Put the 2 young guys, in the same room and hang out. And, Shane is, anti-capitalistic, all this stuff, which I am too now. But, but I still loved fashion. So I remember I had like GQ magazine, maybe, or Esquire. I had Esquire magazine. He was like, Shane's very Southern. I'm very Southern too, but he's really, he's like, man, what is you read this stuff? You like this? You care? And I was like, yeah, man, I think fashion's cool. I like, it's like a art form, I think it's really cool. And he just he just didn't get it. But we would both have our own way of that, how the big other affects how we dress and what we do with our own type of social authorities. So, I make all my own clothes. I do all this. Well, that's his world. There's that a big other there that kind of dictates, like, a lot. When you see Shane come into a place, where he stands, what he thinks, he's a minimalist, he's me, I'm punk rocker. So I've got a whole nother like punk social pressure thing here that I like and fashion. So I got this and that. So that's all part of it. Um, and we're going to tell you what we're really called to do about this social order and what we're called to do about the big other. But it takes a lot of work, and we'll look at it in a minute. But I like this because this is where it seems to clear it up even a little bit more, make it a little more obvious. And this is how I love when uh, he Todd McGowan always does well, is stripping things. It becomes evidence with the ways of dressing. We purchase clothes to appeal to the big other, in an effort to accommodate ourselves to big other's demands. The practical concerns that clothing address are secondary, thanks to the influence of the big other. And it's really easy to think like, well, only people who care about clothes and fashion are giving into this, but that's not true. Even people who don't care about what they wear or what they do, you know, and just wear whatever, they're also making a statement here. I mean, it really does cover every area of our life. And I think what's good about this, looking at this little bit of Lacan here, and me trying to do my best, I really will recommend that if you want to know more about the big other, check out Todd McGowan's work, check out Peter Rollins' work. These guys are doctorates. These guys are professionals. These guys know what they're speaking about. They will be like, oh no, what Jay said, and then they might be like, oh, Jay got that right. Who knows? But those are the guys that you should really go to further this stuff. So I really recommend, Pete Rollins has got you can join his Patreon. He's got a really great Patreon. He puts out so much stuff. He does really high quality stuff. He has really high, he just really wants things to be right. He's really, he's a perfectionist in a lot of ways, and he's just brilliant. So, and he's also my best friend. So, but I'm not just plugging in my best friend terms. And if you really want someone to learn from, like if I have a question about this stuff, me and Pete will talk about it, and he'll help me think about it. We'll go through it, move through it. And Pete does a lot of great teachings on this stuff. And so does Todd McGowan. So I highly recommend checking that out. Clothing address the secondary thing, thanks to the influence of the big other. Under a spell, one person wears a shirt with Nike on it, blazoned across the front. Another wears a pair of jeans that announce themselves as Levi's. A third person buys an expensive suit, and a fourth purchases designer boots. Such decisions about apparel derive from, now this also comes from psychoanalysis. So this is like, this is psychology as well. So we're talking about philosophy and psychology, the unconscious and things like that. Such decision about apparel derives from an investment of the big other rather than the concern for what any particular other might think. We don't typically dress for others, but for the abstractness of the other. I love that, the abstract of the other. Like, I know for me, like if I'm somewhere and someone comes up to me, a stranger comes up to me and he's like, oh, I really like your style. I'm like, it doesn't matter who they are, I've had that happen a few times, One time I was with my girlfriend and I was like, it was a few years ago. She's like, you're 48. And some dude just said you dress cool. I'm like, yeah, I love it, And so there's obviously that, the abstractness of just even strangers. But it's exactly this abstractness that misleads us. We don't see the big other in issuing orders, and this deceives us into thinking that it's not demanding anything. Again, we don't think it's there because it's symbolic and we don't see its demands, but unconsciously these demands are happening. We're losing so many listeners right now. Everyone's like, oh, I don't have it in me to listen to this. But it does deceive us into thinking that it doesn't demand anything. And that can happen in churches as well, and in communities as well. A lot of progressive churches, you'll see that. You're like, oh, there's not a lot of demands on us. But then all of a sudden you start to realize that even in these more progressive churches, you're being policed with how you talk, what you say about people, where you purchase your groceries, maybe, or what kind of phone you have, or uh, where your politics, what type of politics you have. Is it, are you liberal enough? Or, I just recently had somebody come after me, accusing me of racism, which is just horrific thing to be accused of. Um, and it was basically because I was just saying, well, it's not just white evangelicals that are bad; it's all evangelicals. And they were like, well, you sound like one of those people who are like not all churches. But I'm like, yeah, but I'm saying the exact opposite. I'm saying all churches. I'm like, eh, legalism doesn't play by race. It's not legalism just could get anybody. Anyhow, that was a tough thing to do. But that's where that kind of that symbolic order, that social authority comes in and starts saying, well, if they question this, that this is our social authority, and he's come in and said this, so he must be the enemy, and he must be bad. And they just doesn't, despite what I do for a living, the things I've done, the decisions I've made, my life's works, the evidence that is contrary to what is being accused of me, is because I've questioned one thing that is kind of important thing, and all of a sudden now it's, well, this person must be this, rather than I'm trying to open up something bigger. I've disrupted the social order, or their social acceptable order, for that kind of community. You're not supposed to say that. That's the wrong questions, or you're not supposed, that. So that happens quite a bit. And I think we all experience that. I think that's why so many people leave the church, is because we realize, like, oh, well, if I can't ask questions, why would I want to be here? It's not often because, like, oh, I don't believe a man from the sky. I mean, that's probably the most logical one. I don't believe in God would probably be the most logical reason to leave, but usually we leave because we're going, like, these people, I can't, there's some sort of unspoken thing that I can't figure out, and I don't belong. Or these people seem really cruel if I don't follow their social order. Um, this is what makes it so much more psycho, physically dangerous than a typical political authority. The subject demand for recognition plays a cruel part in the erecting of the big other's authority. When the subject strives for social recognition, it doesn't seek the recognition from one or two little others, but from the big other. It's wild, right? It's kind of like this group. In some way, it almost feels like, I'm probably getting this wrong, but in some way, it almost seems like group think, or just kind of an unspoken truth, or an unspoken, I don't even know if you can call it truth. When we capitulate to the big others rewards us by giving us the semblance of a secure symbolic identity. And I feel like we get a secure, we're always looking for that within religious organizations, within churches. No, if it's left or if it's right, there's kind of a symbolic identity that we want to be, especially in our own tribes, even if it's not stated. There's some sort of symbolic identity that's we're rewarded with. But this identity is never secure. I think about in the punk scene where people are like, name three bands, name three songs, and they have a band patch on the band, a band patch or something like that. I saw one the other day, someone said, so you're a people pleaser, name three people you've pleased. I thought that was really clever. I receive a message from the big other that I'm identical to my position in the symbolic order. Think about like tech bros for a second, like tech bros, what they call, you know, the kind of like slightly puffy, North Face or whatever company vest, navy and the khakis and the shirt, and they seem very kind of unstylish, and maybe some hiking boots or some like white tennis shoes that looked like they came from Costco or something like that, and you go like, oh, automatically they have like that symbolic thing of like, oh, those guys must be smart and they probably work in this industry, or they're financial guys, or they do something, but there's something there, because you can see there's a symbolic belonging there, which I find extremely interesting. And so Todd McGowan says of himself, he says, "I'm a professor and a father and a tennis player. Whatever symbolic identity I have, the big other gives to me. This is what makes it completely insecure and ultimately worthless due to the big other's non-existence, because the big other does not exist." I think, like, if you look at skateboard culture, back in the day, when it was really popular in the 80s, and then the mid 80s, and then the early 90s, skateboarding just was blowing up. And especially in the 80s, there was posers, because you could go to the place, you could buy all the clothes, you could have a sick skateboard, you could have the great shoes, you looked like you belonged. And but if you couldn't skate well, you're faking it. That was the point. Like, oh, you're just a poser. You're just acting like a skateboarder. You just look like a skateboarder, but you're not really a skateboarder. So you don't really fit in. Symbolically you look good, but now you can't do the activity. So, when the rubber hits the road, you're not really a skateboarder. Um, that's when I often remember. And I think it's interesting because youth culture seems to point this out a lot more than adult culture. Um, I think we see a lot of this with the current administration. They wear suits, they look like things, but it doesn't seem like they always know what they're doing. Um, but like ultimately, no matter how cool of a skater you look like, and yet, but if you can't do it, it doesn't do anything. And also, remember, the big other is non-existent. It's not really there. And this is where I think he nails it. Trust me, we're about to get into the Bible. Everybody who's tired and ready to go. Um, but one of the things he talks about is these coming of age films, which I think are really great. Uh, is that they show the big other manifesting itself in a few characters who dominate the psychic space of high school. The films such as The Breakfast Club, classic, Heathers, another classic, Mean Girls, another great one, um, typically depict a small clique of social authorities that demand conformity from everyone and ostracize those who do not capitulate. This type of film reveals the big other at moments of its emergence as a force in the life of teenagers. And so I think that's really great kind of way for us to get that peek in and start to learn about the big other. The social authority that demands must conquer the subject so that it will remain physically platent throughout the adulthood. Capulates when our coming of age prepares our psychically for a lifetime of it. So this is we're setting a lifetime habit of the big other here. The power of the big other over the teen manifests itself in Heathers, where social authority resides in the clique known as the Heathers. The leaders of the clique, Heather Chandler, has no institutional authority at all at the high school, but she rules it socially. As a leader of the Heathers, approval or denunciation from her can make or break a high school career of another student. At one point early in the film, she merely looks at disdain at one of the unpopular kids during lunch. When he sees her look at him, the guy spits the milk he's drinking and expresses delight, telling his friend, "Did you see that? Heather number one just looked right at me." And this is an embodiment of the big other. So she is the big, the approval or even the disapproval, but she looked at me, the big other, the social, the the social authority looked at me. She's the social authority. She looked at me, So that's shows you how big and how this manipulates us. And I think this is so alive and well in the church, and we don't recognize it. And I would go as far as to say that people would say that it's not the big other, that they would say it's the Holy Spirit or that it's God. But the problem is if you confuse the big other with God or the Holy Spirit or Jesus, the fact is the big other doesn't exist. So you're projecting God onto something that's maybe a social authority, but it's non-existent. That this isn't real. But people will use that and, well, that's the Holy Spirit trying you to get your life right. And those are the questions we need to be asking, going like, well, is this my conviction, or is this like big other, or is this like peer pressure, you know what I mean, from, the popular kids at church, the popular adults at church, the popular people in life, those I feel comfortable around. Um, he goes on, he talks about the Breakfast Club a little bit, and how it's a more sympathy for those have more sympathy, like the Breakfast Club, Molly Ringwald's character and Emilio Estevez's character, who are they're popular. There's evidence of more sympathy from beneath them than the Heathers do. But to characterize these films in a genre, their determination to conceive the big other and a few figures, which makes it easier to get a handle on the concept. This time in life, the focus on lends itself to exploration of the big other and how it operates. And I want to show you this because this was really revealing for me. Um, a shift in the subject of the big other. This is a big one. To come of age, a shift from parental's form of the big other, a social one. So right now I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, and right now I'm the big other. But I can kind of start to see that with my 10-year-old. I mean, my how I think and my stuff kind of is starting to kind of have a new social order. My kids, they still think I'm pretty, dad's cool and mom's this, but my 10-year-old's starting to go like, oh, I've got more friends and they have a certain thing. So like I got a sale. I found these Nike shoes on sale for Milo and they're really usually really expensive. And I got them, but with the internet, he did all this research and found out that I had bought fake ones. I didn't know they were fake imitations. I guess with the price, I should have known it was obvious. And so in his social order, that shoe can look the same, it can be the same, it could even be made in the same factory, but because there's a stitch wrong or there's something wrong with it, it's no longer approved by the big other in his mind. And it's more about his friends wouldn't have known if he didn't say anything, but he couldn't. It was just in his mind that this isn't the social standard. And so I hope you guys see the parallels here with the church of how this is what Christian communities do is the same thing. It's just, it happens in all walks of life though. And I think it's important to see, but within the church, we're giving it like supernatural power. We're giving it this ultimate authority. And, we're saying, oh, it must be the Holy Spirit. Oh, you're being convicted by the Holy Spirit. You're like, no, it's just this social pressure. It's the social, this thing that doesn't really exist. For a child, the parents function as the big other, the ultimate authority for how long a child should direct its desires. As a child becomes an adult, it transitions from the parent to a social big other and becomes concerned with pleasing the new authority rather than the parents. The coming of age film shows the power of the new authority as the process of displacing the old one. So from the parents' perspective, the act looks like, and this you could see this as the church. You could see the church almost as this parents figures in this. This is what I find so interesting. From the parents' perspective, this act looks like a transgression, not obedience. When we take the changed big other into account, it is a value change. So that's what people don't is often there's just a value change happening. So while disobeying the parent, the teen obeys the new figure of the big other. Underage drinking while driving around town violates the law and the parent's demand, but it heeds to the teen's big other. So, like when I was going through my rebellion as a teenager, and I did a lot, my disobedience to my mother, and because my dad was in prison most of that time, but my disobedience to them was obedience to something else. It was obedience to another big other, another thing, another peer pressure, another social issue, another thing that was there. And it demands strict obedience, which demands a stricter obedience than most parents do. It's true. Like, oh, we should be out till midnight. Oh, we should stay out later. Okay, I get home. I'll sneak out. I'll meet you guys there because we're going to go to this party and it's going to be all night. My parents demand I'm home at this time. So I'm going to try to figure out how to trick them to get out and do this type of thing. but what's in each is, but what it says here is the big other pushes the subject's coming of age to all sorts of disobedience. But in each case, the disobedience makes an extreme capulation. Although the teen in the situations experience himself as transgressing, they are instead moving from one form of conformity to another. So conformity, I'm just conforming to this now. This is who I am now. We're changing. It also varies from group to group within social order. An act as an alternative to that of society, adhering to alternative forms of the big other doesn't spare one from the problem of conformity. So being punk rock or being a hippie or being a socialist or being an anarchist or, all these things doesn't, I mean, when you see anarchists, usually they look a certain way. When you see punk rocker, they look, it's like no one is really free from this type of conformity. Even the nonconformists have a big other. Adhering to an alternative form of the big other, so that's what's happening here. And Christians are doing that as well. They're just adhering to another alternative of a form of a big other. Conformity takes others as a substantial authority, no matter what form the big other assumes. And so it can even cause the other to, or they can even compel the subject to disobey the law. Another example he uses, and I won't get into this because we're over an hour now at this point, and I've lost most of you. Don't forget to like and subscribe, all 5 of you. But he talks about organized crime and how most people would think, well, the criminals, organized crime is not giving into the social context. They're not giving into the big other. But then what happens is, as Todd explains in this, is that the whole reason the criminals turn to crime is so that they can gain a social status that they would otherwise escape them. So they're doing the organized crime in order to be in a social status with that particular big other. And it's an easier path for them to that big other's appropriation than the law-abiding life. Criminality has its basis in a fundamental obedience to the big other. And I'll finish with this. Lacan aims to offer the subject a path out of, now here it is, there's the way. How do we get out of this? Well, through psychoanalysis, really. And that's a lot of work and a lot of money, unfortunately. But Lacan aims to offer the subject a path out of capulation to the authority that doesn't end up erecting a new authority in its stead, because that's usually what we do. We see it often. One certainty for another certainty, one angry group for another angry group. A lot of this like back and forth, a lot of us and them, always looking to be like, now this is my new community and those are the outsiders, or you could join the outsiders and then that former community becomes the outsiders. We play this game back and forth all the time. I see it all the time. And with sometimes it's just as much zealousy or more than before, or legalism to that social order. Lacan aims at offering his subject a path out of capulation to this authority that doesn't end up erecting a new authority, and still the subject must confront the non-existence of every form that his big other might take, including that of the psychoanalyst or even Lacan himself. To embrace the other's non-existence is to see Lacan's status as a divided subject and to refuse to treat him as a substantial authority. So it's realizing that this does not exist, not even within the authority of helping you set you free from this, because you can just, we're going to constantly be in this struggle where we want to just find another way to do it. I mean, it's almost seems like it's human instinct to have this. And Lacan felt through psychoanalysis, you could be set free from this, always setting up this order. It's very interesting stuff. I'd love to figure that out myself. I want to read Romans. Oh, thank God the Bible showed up finally. An hour in, and we finally got to the Bible. Um, the clips for this, the clips, Brian, I'm sorry, because the clips for this are going to just be a disaster. Maybe we'll have like two 30-second clips from this because it's going to be, nobody wants to see clips of me reading. Enjoy me. I'm going to read again. Romans 12. Funny because the last thing we did was Romans 13. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what the will of God is and what is good and acceptable and perfect." Um, One of the things I was thinking that was very interesting about this is, could this be a recognition of the true, you know, absence of the big other that requires conformity to every aspect, even for the subcultures? It seems is that this helps for our purpose today, is if we really look at this as a, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what the will of God is, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And I think we have to do this within our own culture groups, within our own tribes, within our own communities of faith and things like this. This isn't just going like, oh, the world. They always want to scapegoat the world. So the big other just lives in the church, and the church is going to church, all that whole practice is going to be there. And so that's going to be your biggest, that's going to pinpoint how you live your life. But I think here where it says, do not be conformed to this world, I think it's important to remember, like, it would almost be good to say, do not be conformed to the big other, you know, to these social pressures that we see, that we are trying to build our identities to appease some sort of social order, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what the will of God is. And I think reading philosophy, reading books about education, reading books about psychology, reading these things is renewing your mind. It's helping you see what's the difference. Is like, how do I tell the difference between what is the Holy Spirit, what is the conviction here, and what is the big other here? What is the group kind of social uh, peer pressure coming from? What is this kind of like, what are the Heathers? What's the Heathers and what's God? What's Molly Ringwald and what's Jesus? That kind of idea of where we're at. And I think that's why so often you kind of get these cult of personalities in these churches who kind of set this kind of ideal of, it's almost like they're constantly trying to overcome the social uh, uh, that social authority themselves. Like, they want to be that social authority. They want to. So when you see, I think that's why when we see people like Mark Driscoll, or we see people like Donald Trump, we're almost taken aback to high school, because you're like, oh, it feels like high school. And I think one of the reasons it feels like high school is because it's that kind of really basic, like, social authorities. Like, you got to do what I say because it's me. It's not because it's the law. It's not because it's what I say is important. So all of a sudden we have this like social, these people who are trying to be the big other in a way and be the social authority to us. And we're all of a sudden going like, wow, that just kind of, it seems like high school, right? It seems really petty. It's just when we start to see that and say those things, is what we're realizing is that, oh, this is just obviously the big other. This is what we're seeing here, and the symbolic big other is, we're experiencing that in a way that we've experienced it before. And, so it's almost a gift that we can see it. And I think that's what Paul here is trying to tell us is, don't be, even when he goes on to 3, he goes, for by the grace of God, by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of yourselves more highly than you ought to think, but think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For in the one body we have many members, and not all the members have the same function. So it's saying, don't fall into group think. Don't feel pressure from other people in your community, within your church, within these things. Don't fall into this stuff. So in a way, this lines right up with the idea of the big other and how that operates. And you hear Paul saying, don't be conformed to this world. But in the same way, he's using the word world, he's saying to the church, to others, because we all have different, we've been given grace. Take a sober judgment of yourself, realize who you are, not who the community says you are, not who the big other recognizes you as, but who you really are. And remember that not all of us have the same function. It says, so we are many, are one body in Christ, and individually we are members one of another. But we have gifts that different according to the grace given to us. So that's there, and that's why I don't like broad strokes. It's funny because with broad strokes, when I usually argue with more conservative Christians and I confront broad strokes, I'm just a heretic, or they rebuke me in the name of Jesus. But with liberal Christians, it's like, oh, you're racist or you're homophobic, and I'm like going like, do you know my work? Do you know what I've done in my life? All I'm saying is I don't like this kind of big other social way of painting things. I like for us to think a little bit more outside of these communities. Like it's not just this community and that. It's like there's something happening bigger here. There's a huge issue and that needs to be confronted. It's not just one race group or one particular group. It's there's a better way to see this and talk about it. And that's what happens when you're trying to reform things and see things change. So I'm going to end with Paul Tillich's obituary in Life magazine, because I think it's important to little read. One of my Paul Tillich favorite theologian, hands down. Boom. Okay. Paul Tillich and Martin Luther King, but Paul Tillich influenced Martin Luther King, and it's great because when you study Tillich, you can see so much of Tillich's work within King's work, and it's really very cool when you start to connect those two. So this, his obituary is from this copy of Life magazine. I got one that was falling apart. I've already started to tape it back together because it was only $6 for me to get the one that was falling apart. The really good ones were, but it's from this in Life magazine. I'll show you the obituary to give you an idea of how important theologians and philosophers were at one time in our life. I mean, Paul Tillich was on the cover of Time magazine at one point, and let's see if I can find this obituary. Look at that. This is a theologian and a philosopher's obituary, which is a full page in Life magazine, and this is like what 11 by 13, I think, size page. So it's pretty amazing. So I was just going to read you a small part of that because I think it's valuable. I took a picture on my thing, so I didn't have to zoom in. That magazine is barely holding on for Life. So I'm only going to read a small part, but it goes, as a young student in Germany, Tillich joined a Christian fraternity, Wingolf, which went in for serious bull sessions instead of drinking and dueling. One of the great debates was whether new members would have to subscribe to every word of the Apostles' Creed. Interesting, right? The argument found Tillich on the non-authoritarian side, where he remained on other serious questions all his life. He even developed an anti-authoritarian into what he called the Protestant principle, which is that no human institution can claim a monopoly on truth about the divine. Amen. Religion, he described as an ultimate concern, making virtually everybody religious by the definition, since even the atheistic statement shows concern for ultimacy. Genuine atheism is not humanly possible. He believed that doubt was not only inevitable in the human quest for the divine, but was even part of that truth. So I'll leave you with that amazing quote. So, no conformity. uh, so I think I think Tillich sums up a lot of how we feel at Revolution, and a lot of what we're trying to do and get that conversation out there and help people be comfortable with, like, why we say tough conversations or arguing well is for that very reason. Um, because no one has a monopoly on the truth. And we see with things like this psychological idea of the big other, how that can confuse us with God, Holy Spirit, people, the little other, what's influenced, how we're dressing. I mean, everything, our unconscious is very powerful, and what that does and what it can do to confuse us. And I think it's important. That's why to always question authority, and to always have doubt as part of our faith and what we do. Tillich had a famous quote that said, "Doubt is not the opposite of faith, but merely an element of it." And I believe that with all my heart and mind and guts. So there you go. That's today. So thanks for putting up with me. I know it was a long one today. I know it was tedious. I hope, like I said, let me pitch that. Remember, Peter Rollins, you can go to peterrollins.com. Peter Rollins on Instagram. If you tell him Jay Baker sent you, he'll charge you an extra $10 to follow him. This book right here, Todd McGowan's The Cambridge Introduction to Lacan, very good stuff. Check that out. Todd McGowan has got a really great podcast that he does, and for some reason the title is escaping me. I'll find it out and I'll try to put it in the notes to this talk. So you can have that there. Maybe even if we can, we'll try to put a link in there as well, so you can check that out, and also check out Peter Rollins' work on Lacan and the Big Other. These guys are doing incredible work, and I really do believe it is reclaiming a type of non-authoritarian faith in Christianity that is really good news for us all. So there you go with that. Last, it's the end of year. This is the perfect time to get in a thank you, hippie Christian. That means a lot. Thanks for hanging in there. You were the first and last and only 2 comments today. Revolution really does need your support. It's the end of the year. This would be a great time to make a end of year donation. Hopefully this will be up. Well, it'll be up, but hopefully the official one will be up before the end of the year. But you can still give even in the new year. We've got a lot planned, but really do need your support. And just quite honestly, right now, because of December and the first few months of January, my part-time work is out. So I don't have that. And it would be great if I could get paid my full paycheck, which is another thing that helps when you donate to Revolution. I'm able to get paid and make a livable wage, which I think everybody deserves to do that. Just when you do this type of work, you don't work for CEOs, you work for your parishioners and for the people who enjoy that. But honestly, I know it's tough out there. We'd much rather have you than your money. Other ways you can help is by sharing this content with people, letting people know, liking and subscribing. But going and making a financial donation would be really helpful. Keeps this work going and allows me to spend time reading these books and doing these studies and opening my mind and heart as well, and growing along with all of you here at Revolution. But we are going to continue to push forward for this kind of non-authoritarian, non-monopoly, corner truth, faith in people's lives, and hopefully help people have better conversations and keep their beliefs hold them a little bit looser in their hands, so we can grow together. I don't think there's any way to find out what the ultimate truth is, but I do believe loving each other and treating each other well will make the world a better place. So thank you all. Much grace, much love to you. And I will see you here next week. Same Revolution time, same Revolution channel, 11 a.m. Pacific 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time.